Joshua, "Only be strong and very courageous. Observe the law that Moses commanded, and do not turn to the right or left, so you will prosper wherever you go." Joshua's task was not to create some fantastic strategy to conquer the Promised Land. Joshua's task was to stay aligned with the plans that God had given him to conquer the giants. Let me say it again. Joshua's task was not to create the strategy. His job was to stay aligned with the plans that God had for the people of Israel. Before they went into the Promised Land, the Israelites were camped on the east side of the Jordan. To get to the Promised Land, they had to cross over to the western side of the Jordan. But Israel had become almost comfortable on the eastern side of the Jordan. In fact, there were 3 tribes, Gad, Reuben, and Manasseh, that had already been granted their portion of the Promised Land on the eastern side of the Jordan. They were living relatively comfortable lives. I like being comfortable, even in the situations that aren't good for me. If I'm comfortable, it's hard to change. And I think most people are like me. But thankfully, God knows our human nature and wants more for us and has a plan for us. So God gave Joshua an elaborate plan to cross to the west side of the Jordan. It was a path of righteousness for his namesake. It was a path to take the nation of Israel across the Jordan, but more importantly, it was a path to glorify our Lord. That was what it was for. This plan required everyone to do their part. At the time they crossed, the Bible said the Jordan was at its flood stage. So this wasn't some little trickle of water like some of our bayous when it's not been raining. It's more like our bayous when it's been raining. I live near White Oak. It comes over the top all the time. The river was wide, it was deep, and it was at flood, and it was moving very rapidly. And the plan had first the priests had to carry the incredibly heavy ark into the water, into the raging river, and that would make it stop flowing all the time. But once the river was flowing, then the people could cross. But God had a couple more steps that needed to be taken. First off, those 3 tribes that were comfortable on the east side, they had to send all of their fighting men in front of the entire nation of Israel. Those fighting men had to cross in front of all of Israel. They were the first people to hit the other side where the giants were. And on top of that, those fighting men had to stay on the western side of the Jordan until the Promised Land was taken. So after the priests stopped the water flowing and the fighting men from the 3 tribes crossed, the rest of Israel went. They crossed over. But that wasn't the end of it. After everybody had crossed, each tribe had to send someone back in there, pick up a heavy stone from the middle of the Jordan where the ark was, and carry it over to the west side. And what did he was commanded to do? Build a monument to honor him, to glorify him, so that the crossing of the Jordan would always be known as a path of righteousness to glorify his name. Imagine being a priest walking into the river, carrying that heavy ark, and having to believe that God's going to hold back the water. Imagine being the warriors that had to cross over first, with the water piling up on one side, not knowing what you faced on the other side, but knowing you weren't coming back for a very long time and may never come back again. Imagine being told to go back and pick up a heavy stone in the middle of the river that you had just walked over and carrying it back to the western side while that river continued to pile high and higher and higher. I bet some of them questioned God's plan. I imagine that they were all afraid at some point, right? And I'm sure they had doubts about whether they had heard the plan correctly, because it was kind of a crazy plan. They're like, did we hear all those steps right? Are we really supposed to take the ark? But the people of Israel stuck with the plan. They had faith in God, and they followed it, and they crossed the Jordan that day. But that wasn't the end of their work. It was really just the beginning. I'm currently in a personal process of crossing the Jordan. Most of you know my father, or many of you know, my father has severe Alzheimer's. And last year, Ashley and I moved him from Fort Lauderdale to Houston into a memory care facility. It wasn't easy flying him, setting up his room, selling his house, selling his stuff. My wife and I worked hard. And I don't have any doubts that it was the right thing to do. That said, he didn't have the mental capability to even disagree with it. He just went along with it. But this was training, though, for what was to come. Now I'm having to do the same with my mother and my stepfather. Due to their declining memory, cognitive and physical conditions, I watched them decline for a long time. I procrastinated, and I should have acted sooner. I was comfortable until the Lord made me uncomfortable. Now I can tell you my mother and stepfather are not happy about the move here. I'm accused of all sorts of things. I'm accused of lying to them, to deceiving them, of not providing them bare necessities in the house, in the assisted living they're living in, and even been accused of kidnapping them. Though I can assure you, they got on the planes willingly. I didn't do it. In fact, the brother-in-law came and got my stepfather. And you know, they're not trapped in their place. They're in assisted living. They can walk out any